I'd like to call the Board of Trustees meeting to order on Wednesday, November 16th at approximately 6 p.m. In order for everyone to hear our enlightened discussions, would you please silence any noisemakers or turn off any cell phones that you may have? Thank you. Roll call, please.
Lino?
Here.
Baker?
Here.
Ertl? Here. Bell? Here. Duffy?
Here.
And Cole?
Here.
And Quist is excused.
Approval of the agenda as published.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the minutes as published.
So moved.
See from Tuesday, November 3rd.
I'll second it.
Changes, deletions, additions?
Yes.
Adequate remarks? Ed?
On page 9 and 10, on page 9, line 16, we're talking about the development agreement for the boathouse. And the wording on line 16 through 18 about the village-wide parking plan. And then if you go to page 10, where we're talking about the development agreement for Jacko, that is not in the conversation here.
Wait, what part on?
It should just be included. It should be copied and pasted.
Right.
Yeah. So, Janelle, if you make a note, copy lines 16 through line 18 on page 9 over
Into page 10.
into somewhere on item 5 on page 10.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, all in favor with that corrected?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Comments and correspondence. Any correspondence you'd like to?
One item of correspondence handed you at the beginning of the meeting. The summary of it is
Talk louder.
the summary of it is Mr. Larry Gaida is reaching the end of his illustrious career in banking and regrets, but is submitting his resignation on the village's Economic Development Committee.
Is that it for correspondence? Anybody else have any other correspondence to add? Comments. Does anybody in the audience care to make a comment about a non-agenda item? Once, twice? New Village Board business items. Item number 1. Presentation by Becky Kerwin of the Door County Planning Department on the county's hazard mitigation plan. Discussion on the plan. Becky, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
So Zeke told me to keep this very brief, just gives a grand overview of the hazard mitigation plan. So Door County Emergency Services, it was their idea to develop this plan. We are probably the last county in the state to have such a plan in place. Just in a nutshell, the reason for having a plan is so the county and the 5 participating municipalities, meaning the city and the 4 villages, can apply for pre-disaster grant funding as well as post-disaster grant funding. So that's a big, big picture. I don't know if you're at all interested in how the plan was developed, but we now do have an adopted plan in place. That was adopted in July of this year. The county did receive a $33,000 grant from FEMA to develop this plan, so a large chunk of it was funded by FEMA. The city and the 4 villages were asked to participate, and they all did. And so with adoption by the Village of Sister Bay and final approval from FEMA, you are now approved to apply for both pre-disaster and post-disaster grant funding.
Could you give us an idea of the process?
Sure. So I was going to ask if you're at all interested. So in 2000, Congress passed the Disaster Mitigation Act, and the purpose of that act was to reduce public and private expenses associated with natural disasters. So this whole plan authorizes funding for just natural disasters, not man-made disasters. Even though man-made disasters are included in the plan, that was something that the steering committee decided to include. So both natural and non-natural disasters are included in the plan.
What's a man-made disaster, like a dike or something like that?
Like a terrorist attack or or any, I'm just drawing a blank here, but yeah, terrorist attack, groundwater contamination, that's from like a chemical spill, right?
Nuclear
So-
power plant issues.
Yeah, yeah. So the hazard mitigation plan is required now to be eligible for FEMA funding. Technically, if a municipality experienced a disaster, you would still have 1 year to write a hazard mitigation plan and apply for funds, but it's a better idea, I think, to have this in place for now. In case something happens, then you're authorized to apply for grant funding immediately. So in June of 2014, as I said, the county was approved for a grant in the amount of $33,000 from FEMA for the development of a county-wide, multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. And so we asked the city and the 4 villages to come on board, and they all signed a memorandum of agreement for participation, and there were certain participation requirements attending the steering meetings. Zeke participated on the steering committee. So we had a kickoff meeting in September of 2014, and then we had 2 planning meetings, one in January of 2014 and then one in April of 2015. Or 14, actually, I think that's a typo. This was a PowerPoint presentation I was going to project, but there's no projector or screen, so just talking through it. So we sent out a press release and an invitation to all local and regional agencies involved in hazard mitigation activities and local officials in neighboring counties, and asked everybody to participate who may have an interest in hazard mitigation planning. So then I spent the majority of 2014 and some of 2015 working on this plan, working with Dan Williams pretty closely. We had Dan is the Emergency Services Director, who is now retiring, I think as of the end of this year, but he'll continue on into January, part-time, to help close things out. So then in September of 2015, we had 3 open house meetings to introduce the plan to the public, or to introduce the final draft plan to the public. We had sent out press releases throughout the development of this plan, so it was put out there to the public that way, as well as to the steering committees, and we asked the steering committee members to put everything out for their committees, their boards, their councils, to make sure that everybody was involved and knowledgeable throughout the whole process. So the plan basically has 4 chapters. It's a risk assessment that goes over the natural hazards and the non-natural hazards. So there's a description of all the different hazard types that the steering committee felt could occur in Door County and would have a likely chance of occurring in Door County. So I'll give you the top 3 natural hazards. They did a rating process, and the top 3 natural hazards were lightning and thunderstorms, tornado and high winds, and then snow, ice, and blizzard storms. In total, there's probably about 9 or 10 natural hazards. And then probably about the same number of non-natural hazards, and the top 3 rated by the committee were communicable diseases, water supply contamination, private water supply contamination, and then hazardous materials being spilt on a roadway. So there's the risk assessment chapter and maps, and Zeke told me that you all have a copy of the plan.
Welcome page 14 in your package.
Yeah. So there's
14.
So there's map 2.16 in the plan. It shows the facilities and infrastructure, hazardous materials and flood zone. So the intent of this.
Page 132.
So the intent of this map is to show assets and infrastructure that could be destroyed or harmed in the event of a hazard, as well as assets and infrastructure that would be potentially available to assist in the event of a disaster. And then there is a second map for the village of Sister Bay, and this is map 2.17, page.
Next page.
Okay. Contamination, it's called Contamination Sites, Hazardous Material Storage, and Groundwater Concern Areas. And the purpose of this map is to show the groundwater concern areas in order to assess historical and potential future occurrences of contamination of soil and groundwater, as well as, so the green symbols on here show the DNR redevelopment and remediation sites, and that's available on the DNR's website. So here I just have it all mapped for you. And then this map shows hazardous materials, where they're stored, and it's just an indicator of if there ever were to be a spill, where the groundwater concern areas are and where you might particularly want to pay attention, which looks like everywhere in the village of Sister Bay. So there's a lot of red. Oh, and the groundwater concern areas, that came from the green printing process. That's a process that Mariah was heavily involved in, and I can't explain it in detail, but I can just say in a nutshell, it was, they prioritized goals, groundwater and surface water goals, and part of that prioritization of having clean groundwater was to model the concern areas in the county. So I only show on this map the high concern areas and then the moderate to high concern areas. And Green Printing is a nonprofit company outside of Wisconsin that was hired to do this. It's a software model for Door County that is available to the village and any other municipality that wants to ever use it for ranking goals as far as protecting groundwater, surface water, natural habitats, and then there's a fourth one that I'm not thinking of offhand. And then the last chapter in your plan is the mitigation strategies chapter. And so what I developed a list of potential goals and action items, and then I put that out there to all the municipalities and steering committee members and asked them to review that and say A or nay or modify any of the goals and action items. So Zeke was involved in that. He gave me back a lot of feedback, so that was helpful. So you'll probably see that some of the other municipalities didn't really comment on much at all, so it was good that the village was so involved. And we got a lot of credit for municipal participation on the plan. FEMA was pretty impressed, so part of that is thanks to Zeke and other steering committee members. So that's really a summary of the plan, the maps, and I won't go over the goals and action items unless you want me to. I was told I only have 10-15 minutes, so I didn't want to kill you with too much information, but if you have more time or have questions.
You did good, Becky.
Questions, anybody?
Well, you'd mentioned that now there's availability for pre- and post-disaster funds available. The pre-idea, is there something else that the county should be doing or plans to do? Maybe this is in the action items, or what's the difference between pre and post, I guess?
The county, we don't have any plans, at least not that I've heard Dan Williams mention. In the planning department, it's not really our jurisdiction, so we don't have any say or opinion at this point. We were really hired as the consultant to write this plan because the grant funding was given to Door County Emergency Services, and they turned around and asked the planning department to write the plan. So we're essentially the consultant in this situation.
Okay.
And I was thinking about this before the meeting tonight and researching the grants that are available, and I think one thing that the Village of Sister Bay wants to or should consider is if you want to apply for pre-disaster funding and post-disaster funding, you also need to be participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. And as far as I know, the Village of Sister Bay is not participating at this time. So that's something that the village may want to discuss in the future. And the type of grant funding that you could go after for pre-disaster, it involves acquisition of property. So if there's a private building in the floodplain and it might, the village thinks it might make a nice public piece of property, then there is funding out there for acquisition of buildings that are located in the floodplain. There's also grant funding for sealing buildings. So making doors watertight or windows watertight. Then there is funding for, here I have it on my phone, I was researching this. And again, it's all contingent on participating in the National Flood Insurance Program.
So that's something that the other municipalities in the county are part of?
Every municipality, except for the Village of Sister Bay and the Village of Forestville, is participating in the program. So the county, the city, and then the villages of Egg Harbor and Ephraim all participate.
Okay.
And the reason we have listed in the plan where we're required to put a reason down why municipalities were not participating, and the reason we put is that the Village of Sister Bay does not perceive flooding to be a high risk for the village.
Right.
Well, and you have, you know, a strip of coastal flooding area along the coast. So there's potential for flooding from wave-type surge. This FEMA calls it storm surge flooding.
You're talking about the actual lake flooding, not a rainstorm flooding in the basement.
Right.
Thing, so
Right.
So we figure that, you know,
that happens, we're all taking our.
well, that ship that went through and through the 6-foot wake, if we're okay with that, we're probably all right.
Other things, the pre-disaster money can be used for is elevation, so physically raising the elevation of a structure that is below the floodplain. Minor localized flood reduction, and that's local measures intended to lessen the frequency or severity of flooding and flood damages, including stormwater, flood protection, and stabilization projects. And then another item they list here that's eligible is creating safe rooms. So that's what FEMA lists for a pre-disaster. And then they don't list any specific post-disaster projects, but I would think potentially anything.
Post-disasters, largely cleanup.
Clean up, rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, Becky, it's just memory from years ago, one of the things you can do is put your police department on paid leave when a disaster declaration is handed down by the president. Your public works crews come on along with any tools and equipment at a bill-out rate. They have a FEMA rate sheet that you bill all that time against, and then submit a claim back to FEMA for disaster recovery.
So getting back to the flood idea, from the, county planning, I'm sure understands the whole county's map. Do you feel like the village has reason to be in the National Flood Program?
I did just like a very preliminary visual look at what buildings are in the floodplain in the Village of Sister Bay, and you probably have, just in the one area I looked at just north of the marina, there's probably about, just in the area, that one area, about 15 structures that are in the floodplain. So we don't know how those, well, maybe there are no new structures that have gone up, but any new structures that go up in the floodplain, if the homeowner is getting a mortgage from a bank, the bank is typically, at least they require floodplain insurance.
That would be the individual homeowner, would it not?
Right, right.
Those properties you identified are private.
Private properties.
So it's not the village's purview to be buying flood insurance for those properties.
But those property owners can't be buying flood insurance unless the village is participating in the flood insurance program.
So I've got to ask a question of Becky. There are 2 areas in Sister Bay that are touched by FEMA flood maps, and they cover probably the areas that you looked at. They're just north of the marina, and then another spot off of like Little Sister, that general area. If they are mapped by FEMA, is there any preclusion for those individuals to purchase insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program as the only insurer in the United States, the federal government? Even though the village is not a participating entity, it's covered by the map.
My understanding, and I'm not an expert in the floodplain insurance at all, that would be Sue, but my understanding is if they're in the floodplain and they can build without getting flood insurance. But if
they're
they take a
cash
mortgage out
build-outs.
from a bank,
Yep.
the bank is going to require flood insurance. And I think flood insurance is only issued through FEMA.
Yeah, it is. So the reason I asked that question is I've been here 3 years. I've yet to have a single citizen come in, and I know there have been property transactions that have occurred to say, hey, I can't get a mortgage because you guys aren't a participating entity. So what the thought process that I have is since they're covered by the maps, that leads me to believe that FEMA at some point looked at them and said, okay, these are flood eligible areas, and since they're involved in the maps, they then would be eligible to purchase that insurance. I guess we could ask some of our property owners directly, do you have flood insurance if you're covered by one of the FEMA maps? And it's just, again, two very small parts of Sister Bay that even would be, I think, eligible for that by FEMA, part of that floodplain.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if new buildings have gone up in that area and how they were able to do that.
Yeah,
unless it-
actually-
They've been sold, though, in the last 3 years. There's been several that have been sold, so
Yep.
if that would be part of their,
Somebody would have come to us and said, hey, by the way, this can't happen, or some of the retailer or realtors would have come in and said, hey, we need you guys to do this.
When I was developing this plan, people within the planning department thought that the village of Sister Bay does have flood insurance, or is part of the flood insurance program. But in my research, FEMA had done a discovery report, because these floodplain areas are probably all going to change because they're restudying coastal flooding areas. They're doing the storm surge study, which I mentioned earlier, the wave action flooding. Somebody, actually a couple of people in our department thought maybe the village of Sister Bay had flood, or was part of the program. But then I read through this FEMA discovery report and said that the village of Sister Bay was not participating. And then throughout the plan approval process, I also noted in the plan, of course, that the village is not participating. And then the woman who reviewed it, she said, oh, and by the way, the village of Forestville is also not participating.
So here's what that means, right? What the federal government wants to do is to mitigate flood risk. So if you participate, and then we have a flood event, the village, the state, and FEMA will be contributing to buying those properties, which then will be permanently condemned and undevelopable. So if you think about the waterfront north of the marina, all of that goes away. That's one of the things to consider when thinking about this. Do you want that to be an unbuildable area? Also off of Little Sister, right? I mean, I don't know what kind of an event would precipitate flooding of that magnitude that we wouldn't have by far larger problems on a statewide level around Lake Michigan. But that's how they deal with flooding, is they get rid of the problem, and the problem is human habitation. The background on that, we have significant flooding in eastern Carolina. You guys saw this recently with the hurricane that was there. Participated with the city of Greenville for reuse of flood buyout properties there. We had a series of apartment complexes located in the heart of the city, and that's exactly what happened. FEMA came in and said, look, we're condemning this. It's no longer eligible for redevelopment. Your zoning code needs to be amended to show these as non-developable sort of parkland areas, and then they're just that. They become parkland areas. So we spent all this money on this part.
Could have got it for
Could have got it for free. Like flood comes along.
So the only reason why I mentioned that about people in our department possibly thinking that the village was part of the program was maybe you are, and that just somehow didn't get, I suppose you would know, right? Or
I've not done a document review to see it, because I've not had a trigger from a citizen who's had an issue, to really have us nail that down. The couple of phone calls I got were about basement flooding when we had a couple of big storm events a couple of years back, but none of that's covered under the National Flood Insurance Program. So it's sort of moot.
Be curious to know if the mortgage companies are requiring it, though, in those areas, and if, because they're in the mapped area, they can purchase it individually.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, the problem solves itself.
problem solves itself.
Yep.
Okay. Kristen?
The questions that I have, Becky, I'm very interested in the plan, and under the chapter of the goals and action items or whatever, and there were high priority to low priority, and some things were very specific to the village of Sister Bay, and I would like to take this plan as a whole one step farther and see what Sister Bay can do to become more prepared on some of these higher priority items. How would you suggest going about that? Zeke suggested that maybe we start with our fire commission. Would we include you in something like that?
I think it depends on the item. Do you have a specific one?
No, I was just going to go through if whether we formulated, a different committee or we started at the fire commission, just kind of go through the plan and then wherever Sister Bay was highlighted and talk about what is it that we could do, to have less of an impact for whatever we possibly could do.
Does the Village of Sister Bay have a member on I forget the name of the committee, but it's not Dan's.
Fire District Exploratory Committee?
No, I don't think so.
Bay Lake?
It's not Dan's committee, no, it's not Emergency Services or Bay Lake. It's some committee where there are local representatives that serve on the committee. This is just something I came across in my research of the plan, and I'll dig a little further into that tomorrow and get back to you. But I thought that there was a committee that focuses on hazard issues, hazard mitigation issues, and that there was local representation on that. But if you don't know about it, then probably I'm off on that.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. Then I think if this committee that I thought existed doesn't exist, then I think you'd want to work primarily with Dan Williams or his successor on probably most of these items. I haven't looked at these carefully lately, but well, here, for example, Village of Sister Bay has a medium priority, continue to utilize public awareness methods such as radio and television stations and outdoor warning systems. Okay, well, that's one thing. Obviously, you're going to work on with emergency services. Let me look for a high item here. Establish, maintain intergovernmental cooperation agreements with neighboring communities and private vendors to acquire any necessary additional equipment needed for storm cleanup. And I think that's probably something emergency services would want to work on with the village. And probably not just the Village of Sister Bay, probably with other villages. And the city is already doing it.
So then we would reach out to Dan and/or his successor. Okay.
Yeah,
I
and
think
he,
the mechanism is at our fire board level to have those conversations. That really is where, if you think of emergency management, it's housed inside of that entity for us.
Okay. All right, well then I'll bring that up at our December 8th meeting.
and now that we have this plan, one of the items in here is for emergency services to review it at least once a year. But if a village or any village takes an interest in working on an item, I can't imagine that Dan or his successor would say, no, we don't want to work on that. So, I mean, he was very involved in this, and he was great to work on with this. I think he's very interested in seeing this go further. And it takes cooperation from the municipalities too. So, if it's an item that just the county's working on, then it's not really very helpful because it's supposed to help all the municipalities. So I don't see any problem, getting any interest or involvement from emergency services.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I guess I would just say it makes for very interesting reading. There's a lot of things in there that you would never think about until you read them in there that are potential hazards or potential issues in and around Sister Bay, much less all of Door County. And if anybody in the audience wants some winter reading material sometime, you can download this either off our website or the county website. You could download the hazard mitigation plan and take a peek at it. So, thank you very much, Becky.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you coming up.
Appreciate
Thanks for your time.
opportunity. Got extra maps here, Zeke, if you want these.
Move into the next item is public hearing on a planned unit development ordinance for the Sister Bay Marketplace. Discussion on ordinance 245 and 111616, authorizing a planned unit development for Sister Bay Marketplace. Consider appropriate motion for action. So before we open a public hearing on it, I will have Mr. Administrator explain what the purpose is.
Yes, sir. So the information for this is contained starting on page 134 in your Zooms. That goes on to page 144 and 145 of the actual ordinance. So there's a process involved in this. to get things to a certain point, and that point is tonight. This has been a challenging development because it's been a very broad, started anyway, as a very broad community-oriented planning process. And so in this case, us acting as a regulatory enabling agency also acted as the developer for this project site. And so you all have held a dual role in this. How do you want it to be? What do you want it to be, with complete authority to arrange things however that would go, and also as the entity that would approve said development. So the final thing is just this: it's adoption of an ordinance enabling that, and we would then go and record the plat with Door County land records.
Any questions from anybody on the board? Okay. So I will now open the public hearing. If anybody wishes to make a comment or speak to the PUD development that we're speaking about tonight, please stand, state your name and address, and we'll be happy to hear from you. So I will now open the public hearing if anybody would like to speak or address the issue.
Penny Ann Schutz, Sister Bay Bowl, 10640 North Bay Shore Drive. And I'm just concerned about the parking situation. I was born and raised here, and we always had to have parking for our business. And then I learned this summer that in 2008, that's when the law went through that you didn't need parking. Who decided that?
The board.
Plan Commission and Board.
The Plan Commission and Board at that time put a moratorium on parking. That was the start of the recession and the housing bubble. Breakdown was to foster some economic development, was the idea behind that. The moratorium expired in September.
2012. There was actually one expiration in 2012. It was for a 4-year authorization, and then it was reauthorized again in 2012, and then expired September 11th of this year for the final 4. Again, as the President alluded to, the idea was to spur growth and development. If you think about 2008, I wasn't here in 2008, but you had some shops on that property that were really dilapidated, a number of the buildings that are currently occupied by viable businesses in the downtown area. As I understand it from Mr. Cuffern as he handed this off to me, really weren't in the best shape or had not been through rehabs in recent memory. That mechanism is one of the many tools the village attempted to employ to facilitate growth and development in the wake of the Great Recession.
So there was 4 succeeding boards during that period of time? I think there was 4 boards, 4 village boards approved that moratorium and went with it for that period of time until it expired this year.
You have 8 sitting boards. You have an election
Every year, okay, 8 boards, yeah.
It's just like, I grew up with, having parking, so it's like, so 10 people can just decide that you don't need parking anymore? Or I grew up with knowing that only a few of us in Sister Bay are going to have a liquor license. And now all of a sudden, if you can prove you have 300 seats, you pay some money, you can have a liquor license? It just doesn't make sense. And when is it going to end? When is it going to end?
I'm not here to respond and give you definitive answers. I'm here to listen to you, but we have to follow state law. Several of the things you're alluding to are state law.
Okay.
Okay, the liquor license issue, that's state law. That's not our village law,
I'll touch on
village
that.
ordinance, but Zeke can touch on that a little bit more. But
So there really are some defined parameters in Chapter 125 that tell this board how they have to regulate things. So it's my understanding that unless we have an alcohol license applicant that either doesn't meet the criteria as outlined in 125 or our zoning code for whatever that development would be, for the case of 125, the only limitation there is somebody who's of good moral character. So if you don't have some convicted felon coming in and asking for a liquor license, the village board is under an obligation, as long as the terms and conditions are met, to issue said liquor license. Alternatively, the conditions of the zoning code are, do you meet certain setback requirements, as you mentioned, do you meet parking requirements, what are those things that have to be met? So this board would not have sound grounds for denial of a liquor license as long as those terms and conditions are met without exposing themselves to suit from said developer.
And as far as the parking issue, we know, particularly now with the reconstruction of downtown and the beach project, we know that parking is an issue. The moratorium is off, and the moratorium didn't say there was no parking required. There were still requirements for a certain number of employee parking and a few other requirements that still remained in place, so parking had to be provided, just not to the level it was in the past. And we have, at our last meeting, we've had a great deal of discussion about parking amongst ourselves. We know parking's an issue. We have a committee that Denise is chairing that will probably start right after the holidays, approximately, to address that particular issue. And we've got members of the community on it, business community, members of the board, to look at village-wide parking issue, not just the new development areas. So we know it needs to be addressed.
What are the thoughts of the village doing? Are there any?
Well, there are no answers yet. That's why we formed the committee. But we had a list of about 16 items and 16 different types of parking issues to take a look at that we asked that committee to address. And again, that list didn't come just from us. That list came from yourselves, other residents, other businesses that have raised issues throughout the summer. As we knew, once we built it and they came, we were going to have parking issues as well as a few other issues to address. Anybody else? Anything else? Go ahead.
Paul H. It's 10640 on North Bay Shore Drive. Can you give us a little update, because I know the plans have been changing a lot based on things you're finding out in costs. And so I guess, can we have an update of the engineered plans now? I know
For
the area, or
Right.
just any updates. I know things have gotten shifted and smaller. Like, is there anything that we haven't been updated on that's going on now?
I think, Paula, from the last time you and I have talked, there are not any significant changes. Just today, we advertised for a second round of bids for infrastructure on the site. We won't know anything until, I think it's the middle of December, on what those bids will end up being. In terms of work itself, the board authorized at its last meeting for the village engineer to deal with the property immediately adjoining Bayshore Drive and rounding the corner onto Mill Road to handle site grading and utilities improvements. So that's what was bid out. From the original concept plan, the pieces that were shown were that have changed are a driveway coming in from Bayshore Drive to connect the rear of the parking lot, also connecting your property parking onto it. Those have both since been eliminated in the plans. If you guys at a future date want to have a conversation, I'm sure we can have a conversation about it. But
I think that's where we left it, is things change so much, and I want to see the plan before we agree to move forward,
Yeah.
just so we know, because, I mean, this isn't going as planned, because you thought there would be more businesses or bids or whatever it may be. So it's more of a wait and see for us, as it is obviously for you guys as well. If let's say a bid doesn't come through, does the town have any plans of, like, would they landscape it or add more parking? Are you just going to wait until you get said bids?
Well, the village is under obligation at this time to 3 different parties to move forward with development. And the village board would have to contemplate, once bids come back, are they too costly? Do we want to break those agreements with said offerers and deal with the consequences of that? We won't know till the bids come back. I would imagine that bids will be there. The challenging part about this project is it's for a very small site, very complex, and so the cost incremental in doing something of this scale are relatively high based on the land area versus doing a 10-acre development site where you get to spread that out over a much bigger area. So I would anticipate we'll see bids similar to what we did last go-round, minus the value engineering that we've put into them by subtracting items and adjusting items.
And these bids are hotel bids or retail or anything?
Restaurant,
anything?
Infrastructure is the only thing that I'm speaking on. I think what you're referencing are offers to purchase, which would come directly from some independent party to the village. They'd submit them in, the village board would take a look at them and either determine they want to accept them or deny them.
Okay, and
So-
I remember
I'm sorry, so the bids were for the grading,
Water, sewer,
Water,
storm
sewer.
sewer, landscaping, lighting, and asphalt.
Okay. And then another question I have is, as far as you were saying at one point, and even today, like certain things are based on state law, controlling like who and what comes in, and like I think we're now at the point where most people are in agreement that we're saturated in Sister Bay with restaurants. And it's been great growth, and we've had an amazing year, and the town's gone through some good changes. So now in the future, let's say another restaurant wants to come into that area, that's a huge reason why I think that we need to wait and see about this land. I mean, it is right next to our business, but more so it's just that we need to make sure this town is rounding out, you know, not, people come to this town and yeah, they might stay at the beach or they come for one meal and they leave if there's nothing else here for them. So can you, like if another restaurant puts an offer in to purchase property, is that something that the town decides? Before it sounded like, you made it sound as if, no, it's equal opportunity, whoever can come in. But at what point do you guys get to decide who comes into this town?
So there's a fine balance between what the board might like to do and what the state will mandate us to do, or the federal government will mandate us to do. So I'll talk on the layers of that. The first level is as the village board's role as property owner and therefore seller. The village could make a determination that they don't want to sell a piece of property for a particular project. And that's one mechanism that could be exercised. The village board could say, we've got enough restaurants. We're not going to sell any more property for restaurants. That would be their prerogative. The village's role as regulator really doesn't provide, I'm sorry guys, thank you baby, really doesn't provide much latitude outside of being incredibly heavy-handed. So I'll give you an example. The village could exercise its authority as policymaker and regulator and eliminate restaurants as a permitted use in the B3, B1, B2, all of our business districts. They could go away. The challenge is when Sister Bay Bowl or any other restaurateur decides they want to transact either across generations or between parties a sale of that restaurant, sorry, you can't sell your restaurant. So now they have no value to a bank in terms of providing a mortgage because they're a non-conforming use at that point, and will create additional challenges for our existing property owners. All of our restaurateurs in town could get together and say, that's fine, we all plan on doing this for forever.
Well, I don't think anyone would expect that, but basically I just needed to know, so if you own the land, you control who and what comes in here, right?
Yes.
So in that property, you guys control who and what comes in there?
Yes. I would state that the fine line for that also is behind closed doors, the village would need to deliberate on the value of treating one party different from another, extending opportunity that it's extended to others. That's for them to decide.
So I would say on that same note, treating everyone similarly, if you guys waived parking for certain restaurants, what would happen in the future if then we wanted to do something different, or anybody in the town? How is it that in the future we waive these rights, now you're going to require parking again? How is that going to affect existing businesses in the future if you're going to treat everyone the same?
Well, there's a concept known as the living law, and what that really means is that this body and our plan commission are both charged with evaluating our current ordinances as they exist and in determining if adjustments need to be made. So let's say Sister Bay Bowl at some point in the future says, hey, we've got this second floor, and once upon a time this was a hotel. We'd like to put a hotel here. By the way, you guys were trying to get a hotel on lot 12. Maybe that works out, maybe it doesn't, but maybe we want to provide this role of having a hotel in downtown Sister Bay. What could be done from an ordinance standpoint? You guys basically come into my office and say, hey Zeke, we want to pursue an ordinance amendment. And I'd walk you through the process of an ordinance amendment. Maybe the Plan Commission would craft an ordinance that says we're going to exempt hotels from parking requirements in the B3. Any number of possibilities exist for solving whatever problems are present the day that we're challenged with solving the problem.
So in the future, if, like with the changes that are made, which obviously now you're waiting back for that, is that something that I just come to you for, or is it posted somewhere?
What are you referencing?
Like, seeing the plans and like where, you know, if we want to eventually connect our parking lot, that's something that go through you, the board, or is it posted?
It'll be in my office. The bid plans are actually available online through, I think it's through Blueprint is the company that's doing it, but if you go to Robert E. Lee's site, I would imagine they have a link posted there, Robert E. Lee and Associates, for the bid plans. That won't feature parking, Paula. That's not what the board directed them to do at the last meeting. There's going to be some meeting by the parking committee on that particular item, and then we'll have to go back and adjust the engineering based on the outcome of that committee and subsequent action by the board. But yeah, come see me, and I'll get you everything that's up there. Actually, in tonight's packet, there's several different options that the board could contemplate on.
Thank you.
I guess I just want to clarify something, or have you clarify it. The discussion on what the board can allow or not allow on a piece of property is unique in this discussion because we own the property.
Yes.
If this was between two private sellers, a seller and a buyer, we would not have that opportunity. They could put any business on that piece of property as long as it met our ordinances and building requirements, building codes and plan commission requirements. If it was a permitted use, we would allow it.
The advice I would give the board in any one of these positions is you should accept offers within the same parameters of your zoning code. Otherwise, we're going to have any number. It's really odd as a village board because let's say that it's a woman that comes in and makes the offer, and the woman says, well, I wanted to do a restaurant. You allow restaurants. And the village board said, well, we don't want any more restaurants. And she said, no, you're not selling me the property because I'm a woman. Now we have to defend that lawsuit. And that's a real possibility that something like that would occur. So that the safest thing for the village board to do, and again, what I would recommend to them openly here on the camera, is if it's allowed in your zoning code and somebody gives you what you think is a fair offer, you should accept that offer. It puts us in the safest position from a liability standpoint.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Anything else? No. Fred?
Is there going to be parking arranged on Bittersweet Lane for all the traffic that's going to be coming on that road when it's going to be widened? We're talking parking here in the village with the new project
Okay.
on Bittersweet Lane. You know what I mean, don't you?
Right, we know what you're referring to the
Is there
property.
going to be a parking
Okay,
for all those poles?
this public hearing is not about that.
Okay.
Okay, this public hearing is about the development downtown at Mill and 42.
Wondering.
Yeah.
And then if the
Denise heard you. She'll bring it up in the committee.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll put it on the list.
Yes, sir.
Sure, go ahead.
I guess one more, if, back to what we were talking about here, is there any consideration of if the hotel bid doesn't come or whatnot, making the parking lot there? I know there's been talks down the road, because I guess one concern I have is we are growing and growing and growing, but at what point, if it doesn't get addressed, maybe if it didn't happen by next summer, it wouldn't be a big deal, but I do feel like it's gonna get to the point where we go up, and then it's too crazy here. Can't park, and then it starts to go down the other way, and as we're growing, if we can't support that, I'm not sure that will happen, but I know our particular customer wants to pull in and park, and it's kind of a luxury that's been in Door County, and at what point will people choose to go somewhere where it's easier access to the places that they want to go?
Well, I have two answers. Okay. Village-wide, we intend to hopefully have some answers where we can start doing something about it next year. But with regard to this property, we have an obligation by June 30th to have some parking, have the parking figured out and in place on that particular parcel.
I guess the comment I'll make is I go to these administrator meetings, I go to the statewide conferences, and other administrators are just jealous. That's the best way I can describe it. This is like the best problem you possibly could have, right, as you have a business district that's growing and thriving and new people want to come in and be a part of it, and there's just too many cars, so we have to deal with that very positive problem. So on that end, the committee will end up addressing it, and we'll come up with solutions. And Fred, I know you caught me a couple of times today.
457 Bittersweet Lane.
Okay.
And
Anybody else? Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing. Thank you. Okay, questions or discussion by anybody on the board concerning the ordinance?
It's been a long time since I addressed a PUD. I don't remember them only being 2 pages, though. It seems pretty simplistic. Was that done on purpose?
This was actually borrowed from the city of Sturgeon Bays.
Okay. Secondly, how does this, because the map has changed so many times since the first was drawn, does this ordinance change in any way, shape, or form if lots change, if parking changes, if we take away green space, if we divide
Yes,
Lot
yes,
12?
To all of it. You will have to go back and amend this ordinance.
So you do it by amendment,
Okay.
and then you file the amendment.
Just seems so simple.
So legal has reviewed this?
No, I actually didn't have Randy review it. Randy's seen the maps and taken a look at that. Randy's not actually read the ordinance, but Randy, as a practice, doesn't do that.
I mean, I know he saw the maps and stuff, he reviewed that, so.
I would feel much better if we go through the approval process of this ordinance tonight, if it was with the contingency review by our
Legal.
attorney.
Anybody else? Care to make a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion. We accept ordinance 245-111-616 as presented with the caveat that it is given legal purview.
Legal review? Second. John? Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Can I read that back to you?
Yes, please.
Okay, the motion was made by Duffy, seconded by Cole, that the village board accepts the recommendation of the planning commission in adopts ordinance number 245, which amends the official map for the village of Sister Bay and creates the Sister Bay Marketplace Plan Unit Development as presented, on the condition that the PUD is approved by the village attorney. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Item 3, there are no appointments. Item 4, report of county activities from County Administrator Dave Lino. Yesterday, the county board approved the $83 million county budget for 2017. That was a result of about 9 months' worth of activities and input. And I don't know if you read the newspaper today, the Door County Advocate, there was a brief article in there about the budget, and I was quoted in there on something that was said, and it was a misquote, so I want to set the record straight, because I've already had several calls. In there, I was quoted as saying that there's an $83 million budget, and it's too bad that none of the supervisors had anything to say about it. And the actual quote was, it's too bad there was an $83 million budget, and there wasn't a single person in Door County that came and made any comment or any input or any statement on the budget. So,
Other than the supervisor.
Right, no one but the supervisor.
so that was the big thing, of course, was getting that finished. And then also the Fair Board meets on budget day too. So it's normally an organizational meeting in November for the county board, so the Fair Board meets also. There's been some discussion as to what to do with the fair. There's been declining attendance. The county is having to put additional money into the fair to keep it up and viable. And there's been an ad hoc committee addressed issues of the fair a couple of years ago, which they've been trying to work through too. But to make a long story short, the county is looking for input as to what to do with the fair going forward. I think in 4 years is the 150-year anniversary of the Door County Fair. And we're looking over the next couple of years as to what direction should the fair take and what should it become or where should it go. Attendance, I'll give you an example of the attendance. 8 or 9 years ago, attendance was 14,000. For 2016, it was just over 8,000. So attendance is down significantly. Expenses are up significantly as a result. And the question is, what happens and where do we go with our fair? So that was a large topic of discussion also. And those were the two main points of what occurred at the county board yesterday. Any questions? Yes?
What are the expenses of the fair in rough numbers?
About $170,000 a year.
Okay.
And this year, out of was about $168,000, $169,000 in total expenses. I think they ended up in the black this year by about $8,000. But it's also weather dependent. If you have a big midway show or a grandstand show and it's a thunder pouring rain showers, that day's kind of shot, and the rides are shot, and attendance is kind of shot. So there's a lot of weather issues too. But
is the agricultural part and the animals, is that still very successful, or do you see declining numbers in that also?
There's some, call it the junior fair.
Okay.
The junior fair still remains very viable and very successful, and everybody would like to continue that. That's the 4-H projects, for instance,
right.
And all the agriculture, the animals. Everybody likes that, and that continues to be viable, although there is some decline in that too. But if you think back about, there was a period of time not that long ago, there were food booths up and down the Midway. Out there you could go and grab a good meal, you could have fun for the day just walking around doing things. A lot of the buildings were full. Some of the buildings now at the fair are totally empty. Vendors, I forget, there's a commercial building this year, there was one company in it, and the rest of the building was totally empty. There's really only 2 food stands left. For grandstand shows, they continue to struggle with what type of shows to put on. So, the anecdotal evidence I have is, you could also say that's a result of everything that goes on in the rest of the county. The Door County Visitors Bureau has been doing a great job marketing the county, and all the individual municipalities, with our own SBA, for instance, doing a great job for Sister Bay. There are more festivals in place every weekend now than there ever was. It used to be the fair was the only thing going on in the county that weekend years ago, and it was a big deal.
If I could ask a question.
Yeah.
So one of the things, I say this repeatedly, being from North Carolina, that many things are different. So fairs are historically held in the fall in the South. Mm-hmm. And so when I got here, one of the strangest things to me was when you guys do fair in summer. Why is that? Typically it's a harvest related.
I can answer that for you.
Okay.
It used to be a little bit later in the fall too, when I remember going in and seeing big, huge, tall corn stalks. And
Yep.
you go into now, they're much shorter because it's so much earlier in the year. That has to do with the size of your fair, the size of your midway, and when you book the rides and entertainment, they only have certain dates available. Okay, given the size of the fair that we have,
that's what you get.
That's
for
what you get for the
days.
slots. That's what you get for dates. Right. So they're going to go to a larger fair at the more desirable time, and you're going to get it at a less desirable time. So it actually has been pushed back farther and farther. At one time it was in July. I think next year is August 2nd through the 6th, which is still very early. So it's all part of what you have to contend with as you try and figure out what to do.
I was outside the fair this year. I didn't go in. I was there because Stacy submitted her knitting. It seems like it's a very different demographic that's going there. Mm-hmm. If you are outside the fair versus in Sister Bay. How much, it didn't seem like there's, I can't imagine there's a strong presence from Northern Door County down there.
There's from my experience, no, there's typically not. I ask customers when they come into my store, if they're going to the fair, and I asked that on purpose. And not a single one of them knew anything about it. And when I explained what the county fair was, oh, you know, well, like maybe they would take their kids there to see the animals, but they would take them there on Friday as they drove up, or Sunday as they went back. And several of them relayed to me Bay Beach, that they often stop with their kids at Bay Beach, either coming up or going back. And if they knew the fair was that particular weekend, that maybe they would do that, okay, to check it out. So, you know, there's issues with marketing and advertising and that sort of thing too, but it is a different demographic. There's also a great deal of expense. If you just wanted to go by there and have a burger and catch a beer and watch people for a little while, and you went there with a couple, well, it was $15 or $16 to get in for a couple of people, and then go have a burger for another $5 or $6. I don't know if it's worth paying $15 to go in and have a burger.
Does the Fair Board do a free admission pass to the students in Door County?
They do not, and that's part of, that's kind of the discussion, they're having a discussion of what they should do. They used to have booster buttons, where the button was, you paid for the button, it was good for the entire length of the fair, rather than a daily entry fee. So, there's, everybody has ideas, everybody has discussions about it, but it's a changing animal. It's also, you know, the fair, the idea of the fair, of a county fair, is changing in today's demographic and our visitors, and who's going to it and who's not.
Who's on the Fair Board? How many are on the Fair Board? I guess I'll ask that. Is it small board, big board?
Well, it's a double-edged question. The 21 county supervisors make up the Fair Board.
Okay.
There are 6 elected officers and some additional paid employees that actually operate the fair, quote, for us. But the county supervisors are the Fair Board. And the officers are made up of 5 or 6 people that operate. So the other question that came up is, the thought was, so we have John Miles Park. The fair is a county park, John Miles County Park. It's only used a couple days a year. So what can you also do to use it more frequently? Yes, you have Thunderhill Racing, that may or may not continue going forward. But you have this grandstand, you have buildings, you have a lot, the Midway, there's a lot of other things you potentially could do. What else could the county do to foster use of that whole facility more than 7 or 8 days a year? Could you get it in use 3 months out of the year? Could you have fairs? Could you have art fairs? Could you have rummage sale? I mean, what else could you do with just that whole park? And one of the supervisors brought up a good point. We do lots of things for other parks. Cave Point, we put in parking, we put in boat launches, we do all kinds of other things at all the other parks, but what do you really do for John Miles County Park? But we don't think of, it's not in our mindset to think of the fair park as a county park that should have other uses. So it's all part of, maybe we'll give it to the parking committee and let them figure it out.
I think we have our hands full, Dave.
So I think most people would agree they like the idea of the county fair. They like to have the junior fair portion of it try and continue. But we need to take a look at the rest of it and what's going on.
It would seem that kind of plays into the rest of the county, the agricultural segment of it, because that would draw a lot of the same demographics.
Yeah.
And the time that I've been to that park the most is for the Century Ride.
Mhm.
Setting up
Right.
for them. So that
That's
tells you-
a good use. That's a case in point of good use. They moved the Century Ride to, the fair park. So what other kinds of uses like that could we make use of for the park? They do use it for some winter storage, vehicles and boats that are available.
Is there listed rates for that? If you want to go
Yes,
rent the
there
park?
is.
Okay.
It's very reasonable.
Any other questions? Report by the village administrator on various activities and projects.
So we'll give an update last month. That the only thing that I would remark to you tonight is previously approved project for Paco Management, commonly referred to as Chop's new restaurant place on the Braun site. They started excavation work there today, and with your approval tonight, they'll start concrete work tomorrow. So there's a big hole, be careful if you're walking around, that fits it, but it's a big hole.
Not only that, that's some of the best dirt I've ever seen
I know.
anywhere
How'd they get
in
down
the
that
village.
far, right?
It's clay.
Yeah,
It was,
no rocks.
Really?
He's down
Yeah.
8 feet,
Really?
and there is
He's
no
kidding.
cobble. It is
No,
bizarre.
that's,
Go across the street, it's nothing but
I
cobble.
know, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's nice looking, I mean, right in with the shovel, and, you know, he's happy to be moving that. He'll resell that material, I'm sure.
you know what I wonder if it was?
yeah, I was gonna say it.
The
Don't say it.
old
Don't
gas-
say- you're gonna say it.
Yeah, the old gas station remediation.
Right.
Yeah.
They
well.
dug everything out
Okay.
Remediated with fill.
and
Put it
reme-
with- I don't know where they got the
with new
fill, but it's
fill.
beautiful. I've never seen dirt
Yeah,
like that in
that's,
Sister Bay.
that's why, because otherwise that makes no sense. Yeah.
Do you need something from them that they can start the cement work?
No, everything is approved and done.
Oh, okay.
That's it? That's your
That's it.
report?
That's my report.
Okay, we're going to move on down to committee reports. We'll do the closed session last. So starting on page 146 of the Zoom, administrative has not had. Is that yours? Reserve has not met. Coastal byways.
Coastal byways minutes?
She's not, yeah.
DCECD.
Met, we have extended an offer of employment to a young gentleman to replace Mr. Bill Shudwar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This young gentleman is somebody we may be
Do we-
familiar with. It's being withheld
Nope,
because he's not,
Caleb
he or
Foster.
she hasn't accepted.
Caleb Foster.
Yeah, there's a press release from
Yeah.
came out this afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Young man, been in banking over in Minnesota, is coming back this way to get closer to Green Bay. Has generalizable experience, no experience directly with economic development.
Okay.
Caleb Foster?
Frostman,
Foster?
Frostman.
Oh, Foster.
That's it?
That's it.
Economic development. It's not bad. Finance.
Budget just passed.
Fire.
There are minutes of the October 6th meeting in your packet. I recall nothing of huge,
No fisticuffs over
no
the compensation?
fisticuffs, no,
Okay.
nothing like that. I think that's it. And we do have a meeting early next month.
Fire district exploratory. No meeting,
Nothing.
right? Historical society.
October meeting, we looked at, laid out put some stakes in the ground, looking to see how we're gonna lay the new building they're talking about, and laid it out. You may notice some of the grass is mowed. That's about where it's gonna be. And the last meeting we had earlier this month was mainly talk on the website and arguing about how much it's gonna cost.
Yeah, there is that, right?
Also, Pat Listener asked me to pass the word along that the Historical Society's Christmas party is scheduled for Friday, December 2nd, and everyone is invited.
Yes.
Library.
Still have-
All the minutes are in here. Yeah, library. Marina Fest.
Marina, there's two sets of meetings. One from October 11th is approved, the 20th is approval pending. We also just had a meeting on the 8th, I think, of November that's not in there. Primarily, all those meetings were conducted to review the RFPs and commercial vendor contracts going forward. The last meeting we just had, we approved the contracts which the board approved at the last board meeting to approve to send off to the village president to sign and send copies of the commercial vendor contract to our commercial vendors.
They were signed.
They were, great.
Yep.
And so
Good.
now we've got to make sure we follow up as a committee to get all those guys to get them signed and get back.
Question? In October 11th minutes, it says a letter from Bunny Spiro. What was that
To
pertaining?
who, I'm sorry, Denise, what did you say?
The letter from Bunny Spiro, what was that pertaining to? It says it was read aloud.
Was that,
Oh, that was pertaining to the
Vendor.
water taxi.
Yep.
And an endorsement for the water taxi
Okay.
to stay. She had quite a few items subsequent to that letter and what she did. Jim Robinson backed out on the water taxi, so
Okay.
it became mute.
It also says that at the time of this meeting, there were 2 vendors who have outstanding invoices. Are they paid in full?
They're paid
Yeah.
in full.
Everybody's paid in full.
Okay.
Parks?
there's anything there?
Personnel.
We'll discuss in closed session.
Plan.
We'll make one statement from personnel. Succession planning is it's one of the things you all tasked me with coming in the door. We went through an evaluation process and subsequently had those evaluated by our personnel committee. Personnel committee authorized the creation of another position inside of parks, which is a maintenance tech 2 position, and a promotion of Mr. Joe Fellhofer into that position.
So not an additional position,
Yeah.
but a
Modification.
reclassification. Yeah.
Plan Commission. That's tonight. Communication Tech has not met. SBAA. Kathy's not here. Do you have anything to add, Denise?
I was at the last meeting.
Were you?
I was not.
Yeah, they asked me to come and speak to them about parking and transportation issues within the village, so solicited some input from them. They seemed to like the trolley idea. They seemed to really like the idea of conversion of some of the Dahlstrom property into a parking area. Really no opinion on South Spring Road and parking there. Those were the big 3 that were discussed.
And that Chris volunteered
Yes, that's
to
the
be a,
committee.
yeah, the SBA rep for the parking committee.
Youth Center. No. Tourism Zone.
Met.
We don't have the minutes from the last one, but pretty much things are going very well for DCVB. The revenues are up this year, and the season is extending longer than they've ever seen it before.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the season that won't end.
Yeah, the last report that we got, Sister Bay was up 6% on collections.
Nice. Utility.
There's a couple sets of minutes in there. Things are running along. Water tower was inspected and passed, so that's about it for utility.
The grit machine
Sludge
is
handling
done.
installation has gone well.
Yep.
Admin comp oversight. Has not met.
I'm sorry, pretreatment.
Anything to put on a future agenda referred to committee, official, or employee?
Well, do you think it's worth having any further discussion about this flood insurance? Talk to somebody, get an opinion,
I
or?
think it's worth finding out about it.
I'll give a call to Larry Gaida and just say, hey, how does this work over at Nicolay? And do you have any issues with people getting flood insurance? I think he'd be one to know.
Okay.
Anything else? Item 6, consider a motion to convene an executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes, confer with legal counsel for governmental body for any oral written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation which it is in or likely to become involved under Wisconsin statutes 19851E and 19851G, deliberating and negotiating and purchasing of public properties, investing public funds, conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Motion by Lino.
Second.
Roll call. Lino, yes.
Berto, yes.
Bell, yes.
Duffy, yes.
Baker, yes.
Clove, yes.
All right, we're now in closed session. We'll give Laddie a few moments to shut down, so let's take 5 minutes.